Hello, everyone, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where in the world are you. We have a great time lined up for you today with our guest CEO on the Voice of the CEO Impact Series. And we're going to learn about growth of a company, growth of a leadership team, and growth of a CEO to an award-winning company. Today, we have Sean Knutsen from Boveda. Sean, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Keith. And you know what? Usually people do get that pronunciation wrong. Knutsen. Everybody outside of the Midwest pronounces it Knutsen, but it really is Knutsen. Pleasure to be here, Keith. Thank you. It's an honor to be a part of your program and series for sure.
Well, and Sean, just so the audience is aware, we need to let everyone know during the webinar, you're going to share the experience a little bit of some of the products that you help improve, correct?
Yes, I will, for sure.
And what that means, audience.
I'm even going to start it right now.
Okay, here we go. Sean is smoking one of his favorite cigars.
Yes, indeed.
They help enhance it, Boveda.
Well, they
Sean,
do. They help the mind.
Let's start with you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Boveda, a little bit about your family, and what you do outside the four walls of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm one of six original founders of Boveda. And originally our company was not named Boveda. We are Boveda today. But 1997, we had six of us that founded the company. We started actually in my kitchen of my house. I was single at the time, so and in my late 20s. And so it was the logical office and lab, so to speak, to get our company, get our feet under us, so to speak. I've been CEO since the beginning, and shortly after founding the company, actually within about just after 6 months is when I got married. So imagine that, starting a new enterprise and then getting married, within that first year of that, and moving my wife in to where our office is. We quickly moved the office out, and we got our own office at that time. And that was back in 1997, 1998. And we had a daughter within 2 years of that. So that was in 1999. So here we are in an upstart company with a big vision and opportunity and all of that, but all the challenges that go with it and all of those things. So I've been at this now, Keith, for 25 years. And looking back, of course, a lot has changed when you look at that 25 years, but really, when you take a look at the last 5 years, that's, most recently, it's when, wow, that's when a lot of change is really happening. The first 10 years, it's not a lot of change. The next 10 years, a little bit more. And now we really sense the change that's going on. A little bit about myself. I mean, at heart, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and so I've always thought of myself that way. That's, I think, always been my mindset. And even back then, before you can say I was an entrepreneur, I really didn't have any examples of, gee, here's an entrepreneur. I think it's just kind of the frame of mind that I had even in college. And I kind of took college from that standpoint of knowing that I want to do something on my own with a group and try to build something at that time. As far as what I do here at Boveda, assuming that's what you mean there with that, I like to think of myself as part of a team, really. So yes, I am one of the founders. I am one of the owners in Boveda, but that ownership role is a discrete, separate person. And when we look at what do I do today, I'm an employee on a team that's working together with with peers and colleagues that are trying to do something really special and change the markets we serve and make a lasting impact in what we do. And so my role can never be viewed as an entitlement role because I'm a founder. I don't look at it that way. I've got to look at this as I'm part of a team, and I've got responsibility there to step in, continually trying to keep up and grow myself like anybody else, as to maintain my spot on the team. And that's really, I think, very important.
And in a few minutes, I do want to hit the challenge, the opportunity to grow, because we believe that companies only grow as fast as their CEO can grow them and with them. But before we go there, Sean, tell us a little bit about the products, the service, what you do at Boveda. Boveda in Spanish means vault. Let's take it from
Yeah.
there and tell us about what you do as a core business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we want to break it down as a core, why do we exist as a company? And by the way, when you start out as a company, I think some companies probably have that part figured out, but really, my guess is that most really don't right away. And so what we do as far as products, we control humidity and packaging. And so we have a unique technology that we created and we market and we developed and really defined an entirely new category in active packaging that we call two-way humidity control. And so this two-way humidity control applies in packaging applications for businesses, but it also applies for consumers and containers and so forth. But your question is a good one because you say at our core, what do we do? And in the simplest terms, what we do is we really maximize the enjoyment people get from their passions. We're not the star of the show in any industry that we serve. We're part of the supporting cast. And we embrace that mindset in that role that we have as a company as the supporting cast to maximize what people do. We're not the passion. They have a passion in the industries that we serve. We're a part of that, and we want to make that passion enhanced and even better, make it more enjoyable.
And you serve primarily two markets, as I understand. One is the cigar niche,
Yeah.
and the other is the emerging cannabis.
Yes.
A little bit later, we can talk about that, but let's start, Sean. What was the core problem, the problem to solve for the cigar industry
Yeah.
that really Boveda wrapped their arms around and were successful at?
Great. I'll give you a little bit of a background and history about it. It's kind of fascinating. I'll give you the short version of it. But if you recall, in the 90s, the cigar industry in America was really in boom. You actually call it the boom years, the cigar boom in the 90s. And if you recall, cigar bars would pop up in a lot of major cities in the 90s. Wall Street actually was, writing about, and it was kind of the golden child in a way. It was really fascinating at that time because we were just coming into it, really probably part of that. If people were trying to capitalize on it. And a local individual here in the Minneapolis area was a woodworker, and so he wanted to be a part of this burgeoning cigar industry. And he thought, well, rather than make a cigar, let me build these intricate little humidors. And they were really clever. They were made out of wood, but they could fit in a large jacket and so on. And they had a coffin top box. And so if you can imagine that, when you have a sliding top on wood, that geometry of that wood changes dramatically as the moisture contracts and comes and goes and fluctuates. So it expands and contracts and it can crack and all of this. He had such a challenge of controlling humidity inside of this little container. And so, because with a traditional element, you'd fill it with water. You just imagine humidity spikes up toward 100%, the wood swells up, then it contracts. And so continually that's going through an expansion and contraction. At his local, one Sunday at church, talked to a family friend of his, Dr. Albert Sari, who had just retired from General Mills, and he told him these challenges. And Al Sari had an idea. He said, we did this in the lab at General Mills where we could control humidity. And you know what? I've got a way that I could take this principle that we do in the lab to create these really precise chambers where humidity is controlled precisely, and I can make that portable. And so he had this concept, and he put it together with our salt solution in a permeable membrane, and the membrane holds water and liquid, but pure water vapor goes in and out to control humidity. And so that was the problem of controlling humidity for cigars. And now, as much as that wood box would expand and contract, imagine a cigar like that's even more delicate. And as this gets moisture in it, it expands, the wrapper cracks on it. And so then, and also in that process, you're losing some of the flavor and the oils and the sugar that's in the tobacco and so forth. So it was really an explicit need. So it was a real easy entree for us. Now, early on, the thing is, we came in on it from the cigar industry, but we really got excited. And when I was introduced to it with one of the other six founders of the company, and I won't get into a ton of detail, but we recognized that this product could control humidity from a low level, from 20% or below, all the way up to 95% relative humidity. So we were not thinking just cigar market. As a matter of fact, we were excited about the food industry, pharmaceutical, produce, and flowers, and all sorts of areas that we knew we applied to. The key and the difficulty was focus, obviously, in those early days. But I'll just tell you this, being in the right, always having an entrepreneurial mindset was important, because I came from the sales background. When you're in sales, you can have a fantastic month, right? And then on the day one of the next month, you're starting at zero again. And so you really understand this thing. And so when this product was presented to us, by the way, we had this humidor maker make myself, another one of the founders, Tim Swell, a humidor, a real custom, a big one. And he made it. We hardly knew the individual, David Bergstead, who really was the guy who made the humidor. I invited him over for a steak dinner and cigars at my house. He came over and showed us this technology. Right. That after he's been working on this with Dr. Sari. Dr. Sari brought in a colleague from General Mills. So we've got some great technical background at Boveda that comes from really disciplines of science and packaging engineering. And together they really perfected this technology. David came over to my house for cigars back in April 1997, and out of the blue, he showed us this technology. Watch this. He had it in a bag. I'm going to put a hygrometer in here. Watch the humidity climb up and stop at 75%. And it did. He shared us a little mini vision for the cigar market. We got really excited about it. So, wow, this thing is phenomenal. Consumable product. It runs out. You got to get a new one and all of this. And at the end of the night, when he was leaving, he looked over to us and he said, "Hey, will you guys go into business with me?" And that didn't take long, being a hardworking salesperson, to say, wow, what an amazing thing. And to have that entrepreneurial mindset to know that when an opportunity that's really phenomenal comes along, you jump at it. And so we formed a partnership with this humidor manufacturer. Two of us college friends who were there that night, these two individuals that retired recently from General Mills, and we formed this company. So we got into the cigar market, but you know what, Keith? We thought for sure we were going to be in pharmaceutical and food in like a millisecond. We were, the company was going to, and it was really fun to put together our pro forma to see how fast we would grow. It was really great to put month by month and to see look at how great we're going to make, look at how fast we're going to be making some money, but the reality doesn't really work that way. And so we had to pull back through the, school of hard knocks, so to speak, and recognize the law of focus in building an enterprise.
Mm-hmm. And Sean, on that point, so 25 years in business, the first 10 years was a slow climb. I think you used words similar to that. And then the next 10 years, growing. But in the last 5 years, you've almost tripled the revenue, I understand, and you've had a nice inflection point. And part of the path there was the ability to execute and putting the right team around you. And this was really the heart of our original dialogue for this webinar. So tell us a little bit, Sean, before you had the right executive team of A players around you, what was it like, and how did you come to the decision to really accelerate growth by focusing on the leadership team and not many other things?
Oh, yeah. Well, you always have this dilemma when you're early on and when you start out. One is just staying afloat. I mean, just survival is everything. And, the sacrifices you make on a personal level, to stick with it and not be afraid to fail. I think that's a really big thing. But early on, you're doing you have to do everything. You have to wear multiple hats. I mean, that's all there is to it. There's no way around it. And you're wearing multiple hats and functions in areas that you weren't trained in, that you have no idea what you're doing, and that you try to learn it in the process. And so all your time is consumed with just trying to figure it out. And we didn't, in our case, we didn't have any seed money. So the seed money was from us individually. And so part of that was into the business to grow it, but part of it was not taking a salary and just being able to be there and stay afloat on what we had to begin with early on. But all of the challenge, I think, for any entrepreneur early on is, of course, you're fixated on external things because you need to have your product apply to the market you're trying to serve. And so the internal things take a back seat in your mind. Number one, because you can't afford the overhead. And number two, you're just fixed with trying to get the market to accept what you have. And that is okay, by the way. There is an element of that has to happen when you're piloting an opportunity and before you're bringing it into trying to nail it and going into a scaling type of mode. I always wrongly we probably took too long to start bringing in the right people, just so that there was still a little bit of like, man, how can we do this? And part of that fear really is in, well, think about this, Keith, and this kind of plays into it. People are not our most important asset. And when I say that here, both of the people are thinking, what in the world are you saying? No, we'd all know this. The right people are the most important asset. And so having, and really kind of having not having the confidence on our side of saying, hey, how do we know who the right people are? And so those things kind of hold you up a little bit. But when we got the right people, you could see it. And there was a difference between wrong people and right people. And if they were seemingly the wrong people, were they in the right seats on the bus, the proverbial bus, and so on. But man, does it really show itself wonderfully when you have the right people in the right place and you see how that impacts the growth of the company. And a lot of that, when you get to that point, the founders generally a lot of times have the idea to know how you impact your external environment. They know how to impact the market, the product that we have, because we're passionate about what we do, and we smoke cigars, so we knew how that applied there. What we didn't really spend time on were the things that were key to get to the next phase, and that's being able to scale a business and becoming operationally excellent. And so a lot of times you don't think about that operational excellence until you're thrown into the mode where you're starting to add people, and it's like becomes chaos. And so you have to then spend your time and do that, you kind of handle the dichotomy of being entrepreneurial, but then being a grown-up business, of being operationally excellent and being able to do both of those things at the same time, which are so important to do.
So Sean, think back in time, you're at your leadership table, you're wanting to scale, and now you're beginning to put the right people in the right seats. What was your thought process or your process on which roles did you fill early in the process as you went around the leadership table?
Yeah, some of it is just saying, let's look at this. And by the way, when we learn a lot now in the process in hindsight, and I think that at the time you're doing what you think is right at that moment. In hindsight, would probably take a little bit different approach, but you do the basics. You put your financial, your accounting system in place, and the accounting team in place, and then we had sales and marketing in one under one umbrella, and it's like we need to separate these. In modern business, that's wrong to have both of those, and separating that, and then keeping our R&D, and really just building a small leadership team, thinking these were the right functions for us at the time to step forward with and build in those pieces. And of course, we've continually tweaked those. Have at the time on starting out with that process, tweak those as we would go along to become more effective, I guess, as a team. But we, probably there was a time when things would get so frustrating, you'd recognize that business is coming in, the opportunities there, and you're growing, and there's just absolutely no possible way we're going to be able to satisfy the needs of the market when we have so much entropy, so to speak, on the internal operation of the enterprise. And we have to look at how we operate internally. And so as a CEO, you need to say, first of all, I'm doing a lot of things. Everyone's doing, not just me, but others. But we have people doing a lot of these things that aren't necessarily the best at these things at all. And you have to bring people in that are the best at those things, the best that you can get at that time, and keep growing and strengthening that team to do that. And so we started with a small leadership team and started to build process in at that time. But we didn't have, we knew the importance of process, but we really didn't build the process in until, as we added people and the recognition that it's chaos without the right process and structure that goes into play.
Mm-hmm. And Sean, this is an important point. I want to shine a light on it. What I heard you say is, as the demand outstripped our ability and excellence to execute, it became very obvious we needed to turn our gaze internal to the company and then rebuild a player top leadership team.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
That's accurate, because every business has a goal to win customers and satisfy those customers. Mm-hmm. But if you're those are external things that we're doing to integrate into the marketplace. If you don't build the internal and have the organization functioning properly, you can't make customers happy. It's not even possible. No matter how hard you try, you are going to fall down, and people will be unsatisfied with your wonderful product. Mm-hmm.
So Sean, let's get into your mindset a little bit. So as you went from the founding leadership team and then leaders that in retrospect now you were outgrowing as the business grew, what had to change in your mind as CEO to make the commitment to build the next level leadership team?
I will be brutally honest and frank with you. I didn't know what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so that feeling of knowing I need to figure out how to, you instinctively, these things, right? You know that you have to build a team, but it's like, is there a model? How do I build this? Are there best practices? What are the areas of thinking that can help us build the right process and internal system within the company so that we have less energy drain from what we have in here? How do we evaluate and look at our people to know that even the people can be a drain, the process can be a drain that you have if it's not right, the people can also be a drain if the people aren't right, and so forth. But you have these inklings and these intuitions, as it will, because they're natural for us, but we have to take an element to say, I need to learn. We live in a day and age, which is beautiful, where there are so many people that are willing to share, the best practices, how they did it, and so on. And there's not just one. There's a lot of thread of commonality between a lot of them. There's differences in all of them. And so going on a quest to really understand, to say, I want to know what to do. I don't want to guess what to do. I don't want to try to create the wheel and then tweak it over time, which is what we do even with, with the foundation. We need to start with a good foundation of what people have done in the past that have been absolutely phenomenal. And so we know a lot of these practices. When you take a look at scaling a company and so forth and building the right systems in place, there are all kinds of great material and stuff out there, but you have to start, a lot of great consultants on that regard as well. And you have to start looking at it. But I believed it in not just bringing in a consultant to tell us what to do. We have to have an instinctive understanding and an ability to get it so that we can apply it even more and rapidly instill it within our culture even better. And so not knowing what to do, really, it's like, my gosh, I have got to start to get a ground level so I can just, rather than speak my opinion, I can start speaking with a little bit more confidence with what has been done and what works out there and what doesn't work. Because the way you do things today and how we build culture today and how we build an organization that really works well together and can make decisions on the front line and so forth, it's different than 20 years ago, and probably even 10 years ago and 15 years ago, in the way that all these wonderful companies used to do these things. And so even business management theory and practice has evolved over time and continues to get better and so on. And so, as an entrepreneur, you always look at how do we integrate into the external environment that we're in. In other words, the sales, the marketing angle, and all of the product. But you spend all your time with that marketing. How does our brand going to look? What's our brand personality? What are the materials, and how do we sell it? But you have to spend. There's a time where you really need to shift. Not lose that, but then start to understand with the same level of zeal on how you build that internal infrastructure properly so that it can match that external impact that you're making. 1 second, I'm not going away. I'm just redoing my timer on my fan for the wonderful cigar smoke during our meeting. So sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah. So so the impact, I can't, it's those things. If you want to impact the external customers that you have and make an impact, there is such a equal critical importance on the internal side of things. Man alive, is it? And I think most companies probably recognize that a little bit too late. Maybe too late, yes. And they all wish they would have probably embraced these things earlier on. They all do it because they're forced. They have to, because it's like, my goodness, the weight of this, the wind is coming at us internally. We need wind at the back internally. There's enough wind coming at you in the marketplace with competition and trying to pioneer new things and so forth. And the more you have that drain internally, there's no way you're going to be able to make that impact externally. And so there's a large shift on an entrepreneur and a CEO's role in the early stages of a company. When you go to the other stages that go to stage 2 or 3, when you have to shift and have a really strong internal apparatus or system in place.
Sean, let's talk about your role as CEO. So think in terms of prior to having all of the right A players around you, the right people on your leadership team, and then that took a period of time, and then fast forward to a future point where you have the right team around you. What did your role change from being? What was your day-to-day, the things that you were doing before and after, and how did your thinking have to change too?
Oh man, that was a lot. I've got a friend who's a CEO. I talked to him. What's your day like? What do you do? I remember even looking and doing searches. What is a great CEO? What is a great CEO? I need to understand these things. But there's a big transition, and you have to be comfortable doing this. Number one is recognizing that there are people better at everything that you're doing, okay, as an individual. And the most important thing that any leader can do, it doesn't matter where they sit in the organization, is to always hire a better. And so I love what I heard from Jeff Bezos, and others have probably heard the same thing, that when you look around as your leadership team, we should all look at each other. In 5 years from now, we look at each other and we say, aren't we glad that we got involved when we did? Because otherwise we got in because we continue to hire better than we are. And that's the most important thing. And you have to start with a foundation of humility to really get to that point. But how my job changed, you're involved in a lot more of the tactical things, the tactical execution, a lot more decisions than you could, or that you were at early on. And I read something from the author Shannon Susko, and some might be familiar with her. She's a Canadian entrepreneur. And it kind of struck with me as I was thinking, how much involvement do I have within, and you micromanagement you don't want, but you do need involvement, of course. You need to really be involved in the business, in the front lines and so forth. But she painted a picture, and I think this picture is really good. The CEO, think of yourself as sitting in the bleachers, managing a leadership team that's on the sidelines, that's managing a team that's tactically executing your game plan on the field. And so, thinking that piece through was a really, I think, healthy view and transition the way, I look personally at my role. And always looking at it from that point. And we embrace, and I think this is the right way to do things. And there's a lot of material out there on how to build teams and have a team of teams. Are we going to be a top-down organization, or do we, want to be more of we want to be self-managed? But keep in mind that when you're self-managed, we want to appear as self-managed, but there's always hierarchy underneath. There always has to be that hierarchy. Otherwise, you have just chaos and so forth. But you want to empower people within the organization, deeper in the organization, with the appropriate decision making and so forth, and that must be pushed in deeper into the organization with the proper framework. And if you don't do that, you can't scale. The leadership team becomes a bottleneck, and so you start with the leadership team on building business acumen and principles on what decisions we make as a leadership team, what decisions go down, and what process do we make as teammates within the organization. That's consistent with the framework we have in place, the framework of vision, what kind of culture we have, the strategy that we're executing. Okay, that's the skeleton, the framework. Now you work within that structure as a team, and the decisions must be pushed deeper, and the processes we put in place must foster and cater to that. So the leadership team process is the same, similar as the process that other teams within make, but the level or the types of decisions are different at each one of these areas in the organization, so that the leadership team does not become a bottleneck, because that's what happened when we first built our leadership team. It was a top-down command and control, and it doesn't work that way. And you have more dysfunction, you've got more confusion deeper in, you have people who are waiting to be told what to do, and invariably every decision that a leadership team would make and that we would make, they would always come back as the wrong decision, because not the right perspective in gathering was done up, down, and across the organization where it was needed on certain decisions, depending on what types those were.
Okay. Sean, let's pivot now a little bit and talk about some of the challenges you've experienced in the last couple of years regarding supply chain. Tell us what those challenges have been, how you've experienced, and how did you overcome those, and how are you overcoming them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'll tell you the best way that I see it. It goes back even, over 10 years, because there has, I think a key ingredient, of course, for a company, and it also, by the way, this is the ingredient I believe that helps give you the confidence to build out the right leadership team and so on. I think a company needs to think big, and whether that big doesn't mean Google big in that sense, but big impact for what you're doing. And you really, and it's not easy. You think about all the big, the big goals and big hairy audacious goal and all of this. You have to look down at the future and you say, this is the path we're going on. And if that's the path we're going on, is it lip service or are we really doing it? And if you're really doing it, you get on that ship. And when you get on that ship, you say, these are the things that we need to build today to get there. Because if you start building that infrastructure too late, it's going to be a bottleneck during those growth times. You have to anticipate those things, understand with the proper evidence that your market is good and that you have what's viable into the market, and there's feasibility and all of those things within there. But then you need to start building that infrastructure internally. So we started that infrastructure of our ERP system and so on, and then the people system involved in that. And so when you know where you're going, you're willing to make some bets that are calculated and not too risky because you've done the evidence gathering. But there is an element, this is where we're going, so this is the proper step to do before it gets. So when COVID happened, our first response was probably just like every other company. This is an unknown. We all grew up in such a time of peace and everything else and harmony and so forth. We haven't lived through challenges. And so when COVID happened, it was like, wow, what is this? We can't go to work. We got to sit at home. And what's this going to happen to the marketplace? And it's like, wow, let's pull back. Slow down production. Slow down, these things. And so the initial pause. Let's regroup and strategize as a leadership team. But even early on, this is the fortunate thing about what we do in the industries we serve. COVID was good for a lot of companies, and they were good for our company as well. And as soon as we recognized that, we started, and then the challenges that invariably happened right away during the growth that we had that occurred during the lockdown months and months of lockdown was that the supply chain was getting difficult, and so we invested heavily in those things that would go beyond knowing where we're going, beyond what we needed today in advance. And that includes fulfillment centers around the country and world, and building much more inventory that we needed, getting the machinery in place ahead of time and so forth, and just building that happen. So we were lucky that we were ahead of that curve. And so even though we have been impacted by, the supply chain issues, they haven't been detrimental for us, thankfully. And I credit that largely, Keith, to having a sound. We were lucky that pre-COVID, we had an infrastructure and a leadership team that was built and put in place just before, right at the transition of pre-COVID and COVID, with the way we do things today. And keep in mind, that wasn't the first time we expanded the leadership team based on our strategy and the functions that we needed as a company, which is important first to do, as how we did it. We think of it tactically and so forth. With that right leadership team, we had the pieces in place that could execute on that strategy to at least minimize the impact of the supply chain issues that you mentioned.
And Sean, talk a little bit about where you are in growing in the new market of cannabis. You're solid and growing in the cigar industry. You can comment on that, but you also now are navigating a whole new industry and a whole new business line potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Early on in our days, we always knew that marijuana was our technology applied to marijuana. Marijuana is sold by weight. And so if you can have moisture in there, it's worth more money. If you put too much moisture in there, you get mold. So you can't just inject that with moisture, because that's not good. We have been selling in the cannabis industry starting in California back in 2007. So we've actually been selling our technology in that industry longer than most people realize. And so we got into it then, and even then, people would always call us, "Oh, do you use this for weed?" so to speak. And I remember back in 07 and 08, we would get calls coming in when medical, it was called herbal medicine, but that was medical marijuana in California. We would get calls coming in, and who remembers the old the movie, Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Spicoli and all of that? People would call in and say, "Yeah, I need your product for my humidor," but they sounded just like Spicoli, and it was, "What RH level do you need?" And it's like, "Yeah, we need your." And so we would always know what they were after. And so we have been really growing and pursuing that, calling it herbal medicine, as it's become more acceptable in the country and really world, as really this is a valuable and beneficial product, I think, for a lot of ailments and so forth. We embraced it more fully, probably starting, from 07 to 2015, but then even more so with more investment involved starting in 2015. And so we, as a company, we're on an 18-year run, averaging compounding annual growth of 33%. I love that, sharing that, because it just is steady plodding. Those are significant numbers. It's harder as you get bigger when those numbers happen. But now the cannabis market is actually at and has exceeded what we do even in the premium cigar industry. But what's remarkable is even the premium cigar industry continues in itself, even though we've been doing this for 25 years in the premium cigar market, is still well over 20% compounded growth just in that market. And the cannabis market is higher than that.
Okay.
And so we have got two separate teams, from a sales, B2B sales. We have a team that's dedicated on the cannabis market, not just in the United States, but internationally, including Canada and Europe and other areas. And then also cigar team of people for the cigar market. Our marketing team has teams within that have focus from a brand and marketing strategy and so forth that focus on each one of those applications.
So, Sean, as the company has continued to grow and you've got the right team around you, you've got good demand coming in, where do you spend your time now? What are the most important 2 or 3 things you are doing as CEO in this high growth business in the stage you're in right now?
Yeah, absolutely, positively, no question about it. If you take a look at what are the KPIs for a CEO, one, aside from the obvious, where the enterprise must continually increase in value, it's really important, culture, of course, but really it's how clear are we? Are our priorities clearly defined, and are they clearly communicated in the organization? So a big thing to me is just that repetition, that reinforcement. I love what Patrick Lencioni said. The CEO should look at himself as the chief reminding officer, the CRO, chief reminder officer. And when you repeat these things and so forth as a company, and sometimes you think you're doing it enough, and I don't know that there is a level of enough actually. And so a lot of it is really just that, reinforcing the path that we're on, and reinforcing what is the most important work that we're working on, breaking it down into the most simple terms and key objectives as best that we can. And that's not easy either, by the way, as best we can to keep that focus and importance. We have a team of people, and every CEO and every company has a team of people. The CEO is just a position on the field, essentially, right, doing it. And that's probably the most critical role is making sure that path that we're all on. And so when we come to work as individuals, we need to know that our work has meaning to it and a purpose, and so that it's all working together. And so I believe in that reinforcement of bringing, when you look at culture, it's not creating silos in the organization, but every function in that organization must understand that they need to support it. Well, they work together to make it happen. And we've got the sales side that's driving revenue, but every single other function that's in that works, we're all supporting that tip of the spear of driving that revenue. But there can't be silos to be an effective team. And that's where culture comes in to be so important. And so identifying and making sure that you're part of that positive culture and that cultural reinforcement of what we want, making sure that the disciplines that we do as an organization are the right disciplines and actually thrive on the discipline. The discipline has to happen. We know that, but you and I talked about that a few weeks ago. Where that discipline as a company starts first and foremost with the disciplined people, and if you don't have self-disciplined people, there's only so much you can do to drive someone to be disciplined, right? That also goes back to getting those self-disciplined people, but then having your process and system in place that encourages and fosters the right thought in the framework, so that you continually are bubbling up what needs to be bubbled up in information, challenging what needs to be challenged in the right context, and so forth, and then putting in your disciplined approach of your system and process and what you're measuring, and are you measuring the right things, whether that's the outcomes that you're measuring or the activities that you're doing that you're measuring. And you have to go on both of those things and break it as simply down as possible, and it's to simplify life, and keep reminding everybody. I feel that's it. And from an outside point, it's not rocket science. I look at it as just fundamentals, and that's refreshing, I think, in a lot of ways. It's not easy. It's simple. It's not easy. How about that?
Sean, as we've worked with CEOs from around the world, we see that the most disciplined, effective CEOs set time aside to always continually learn, and also they protect their thinking time so they can think about the future. Talk a little bit about where and how do you set time aside, or what do you do to continue to always be learning and protecting that valuable thinking time as the chief executive?
Yeah, so probably about 10 years ago, a little more, 10 years ago, I mentioned one of our co-inventors, Dr. Alsari, passed away, and so we had a replacement, and it was actually his old boss. He was at General Mills and then at Novartis. This guy was a brilliant chemist, and Dr. Sari was one of the most brilliant people you'd ever meet. So was this individual. And I remember a conversation that I had with some individuals that worked with him, and the question that I didn't throw up, but somebody else did: who's the smartest person that you ever worked with? And I always thought they'd say Dr. Sari, and he was probably right there. They said, Dr. David Egberg was the most brilliant person. And he went on to define. He says, I remember at General Mills, and he managed a team of really brilliant scientists. He says he wouldn't let you come into his office in the morning. He had a couple hours blocked off every day. And and he would read, and he would develop himself personally, and he would not let anyone interrupt that time. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, because you have to structure it. And I think the morning is always best. The other people have their times or whatever. So that's what I did. I block off 7 a.m. to 9, roughly 9:30 a.m. in the morning, to have that time that's just personal. It's personal development time. A lot of times when I get in here at the office now, I'm in Florida now, obviously when I work, we're a virtual company, but I would put a do not disturb, on my office at that time. But that was a kind of an interesting example. And I think that's really important. And even when you do set that up, Keith, it still takes a real effort to have that discipline to say, I need to work on this thing. And sometimes even with that, it's easy to go astray on that time.
Mm-hmm. Sean, we're coming into the last 10 minutes of our time together. When you think about the biggest threats to your enterprise as you look into the next 5 years, what are the threats that keep you awake at night or occupy your concerning time regarding Boveda?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of companies, a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. There's a mindset like, what do we want to do? What are we building? As far as I'm concerned, there's one approach to building a company to flip it, right? Mm-hmm. Jim Collins talks about that. Another one is building something that is really enduring. And when you do the math, just before COVID, I had an opportunity with a group of CEOs to sit in, Jim Collins and so forth, and learn some things. And he talked about the math on that, by the way, where when you take a disciplined approach to what you're building, something enduring, you put all the things that we talked about built in the system, and you put the right people in the system, you manage the system because you have the right people, you can build something special. But my fear is, and what keeps me up at night, we never want to be a one-hit wonder, right? We don't want to be Milli Vanilli and there's our hit song and that's it. And so, how do we build something for the future where we can continually reinvent ourselves and be at the top of our game, to always be a market-leading company in what we do, and so forth? And what is the best way for us to continually innovate, exploit what we've got, and then explore the new, so that we can always stay ahead of the competition and market and always be on that forefront. And so, that's I think, being right. It's one, building what you have and making it a viable thing in the marketplace. Two, we go and say, how do we build the internal infrastructure so we don't have entropy internally, but that we have a system that wind is at our back, and that's with people and system and process and so forth. And then the next thing, how do we stop becoming, to the gravestone of just doing that and then running into the downward pressure on pricing when a product reaches its full life cycle and so forth? You need to have that built in of renewal. And where is our part of renewal, and how does that fit within our structure and so forth? And that, I think, is a key component. And when you build with that, there's a way to, you think about this, we know how hard it is to execute, right? All of the ideas are easy to come by. They're great. How many great companies are out there that had great products, but if you can't execute on it, big deal, right? Mm-hmm. You need to be operationally excellent, and you need to keep that team and group executing tactically in the short term. But you also need to now build that wonderful and the genius of the and of how do we look at long term and building that in. And so that's what it is. I think when you build to flip, you're probably just focused on capitalizing on the opportunity you're in and then flipping it. But I think that what we're doing is building something special that's really worthy to last, as they say, and that innovation role and that renewal is really important. That fits with who we are as a company and what our purpose is as a company. Not reinventing ourselves to, chase after other things, but to fit in that framework.
Building to last, as Colin says.
Yeah.
Sean, toughest decision you've ever had to make as a CEO?
Well, they're always the toughest ones. I have to do with people. I think no matter what, hands down, because you're affecting people's life. You try to build a culture that people love to be a part of, and so you like to think that they enjoy that. And so, even if they enjoy and love the culture, if they're not the right person for the role, you try to find another role. But if you can't find another role, you have to take them out, or they don't fit. And you have to relentlessly look at what values define your company. And if you don't make decisions based on those values, you're not doing the right thing. But those are the toughest decisions by far to make. And so one in particular had a really good friend that worked within our company, important role, but it wasn't the right fit. And that was very difficult. There are many difficult decisions, but the people decisions, I think, are the hardest because you're affecting people's lives. I think the best way to look at it is ultimately you're helping them, because if it's not the right role for the company, it really isn't the right role for them. So you're preventing their growth as an individual. I don't want to step in the way and prevent somebody's growth. And so you have to make those decisions, even if they're hard, they're painful for the person and on both sides. It doesn't matter. Other decisions too, of course, but I think those always stand out. Those are the ones that keep you up at night. I mean, there have been decisions that have impacted us financially in a major way that I don't think I lose sleep over as much as those that it's like, all right, we need to move along here in this area, which I think are always more difficult because you're dealing with another human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sean, when we spoke a little over a couple of weeks ago, I asked you, which I'd like to ask again, looking back on your career as a leader, many different leaders have mentored and helped shape you. Choose one who had a lot of impact on shaping your leadership style and who you are today as a CEO.
Yeah, I think a big one happened in my 20s. So we all get lucky with meeting and working for people that just for whatever reason, for where you are at as an individual, it resonates properly and so forth. But I used to, back in the early 90s, that was the early stages of the cellular phone industry. I mean, now they're, available for everybody in a Best Buy and so on. That has been a long time, of course, but way back in the day, it was a business-to-business transaction. It was lucrative for dealerships and so forth. I worked for Cellular One, then AT&T, and then worked for a smaller dealership. And this individual that owned this dealership in the early to mid 90s, and is still a lifelong friend, Chuck Rutherford, and an advisor in a lot of ways. But he really demonstrated, leaving that corporate world of AT&T and sales, and I say corporate, I was just a sales guy in there, but I mean, nevertheless, you kind of get an idea of how the corporation was. But he really demonstrated a level of humility because I thought he was one of the smartest people I ever met, but he was a student of business. And rather than just think that he knew it all, he would dive in to really seek to learn. And learn, in particular, his area of passion was marketing and so forth. And how do you build a category and what really is a brand strength? And he would dive in and apply those principles. The way he led with values and so forth, that, we're not serving the almighty dollar. There are more things that are important. As a matter of fact, a company has to make a profit. That's really important for us to identify where we make a profit, and we need to make a profit. And we look at those things and how does this impact our cash flow? And those have to be very, very important. But if those lead the way for what you're doing, you don't necessarily get to achieve those things as much as when you go into look for it as deeper. And what are the real values that you have, and what are you trying to do to make an impact that are more pure in sense? Because those other the profit and the revenue and the growth, all those are important. We look at them; they come as a result of having that those core values internally as how you operate. So I learned that from Chuck and how he behaved in business. It wasn't ruthless in terms of how he would. It was ruthless in his pursuit of understanding, and then applying that understanding was ruthless. Not ruthless in the way he negotiated or conducted his business in terms of sacrificing others. It was always more team-like apparatus, creating opportunity for people. And I felt like he gave me an opportunity when sometimes I look back and say, wow, I don't know if I deserve an opportunity. You know what I mean? And it's like he's stepping out in confidence to try to groom and so forth, which meant an awful lot and really set an example. So I gave you that example where Dr. Egberg would read, but really it started even earlier with Chuck to dissect and then apply, almost like you didn't know it, you don't know anything. And so I'm going to not just read this to know it, because there's a difference. He would read it to really apply these principles. That was such a major impact to me. And a lot of that, what I learned from him, I brought and carried to when we started this enterprise.
Sean, as we finish up here, look through the camera to our peer CEOs worldwide that are running privately held growth companies. Give them one piece of counsel or advice as we close here.
Yeah, that is great. I would say it's embracing two seemingly opposing things. You need to embrace, because being excellent internally is in your operation, but you can never lose that entrepreneurial spirit and the creativity that got you there, and the ability to balance both of those things and strive truly to be great at both of those things, and not let your process and mechanics get in the way. The process and mechanics must serve the real output, which is that creativity and entrepreneurial spirit, not the other way around. It's really important not to put yourself and pigeonholed into a box of check boxes, but to keep that level of freedom of entrepreneurship, regardless of how big that you get, and balance those two things together, which is not easy, but it's magic in that those two things.
Okay, everyone. Sean Knutsen, the founder and CEO of Boveda. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I hope it was interesting. I hope there was value in it. And it was an honor to speak with you, Keith, very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care.
Bye-bye.